everyone to our regulatory panel. Today we're discussing the path to regulatory approval, a new era. I'm Alison Dennis, a partner at Taylor Wessing and co-head of the International Life Sciences and Healthcare Sector Group. I have three panelists today. Steve Lee, Director of the Diagnostics Regulation at the ABHI. Jessica Shull, European Lead for the Digital Therapeutics Alliance and Project Manager at Belvitke Biomedical Research Institute. And Georgia Ravitz, Partner in the Regulatory Team at Wilson Sonsini. We'll start with some introductions covering how COVID has changed the regulatory landscape. And I'll start with Steve Lee.
Thanks, Alison. Hi, yes, my name's Steve Lee. I currently work for ABHI on the diagnostics regulation. I started this job in October last year. Prior to that, I spent 25 years at MHRA, focused on IVD regulation, but looking at medical device regulation too. ABHI is the Association of British HealthTech Industries. It's the trade association for the UK for the HealthTech sector, and we provide support, advocacy and advice to the HealthTech community. In terms of regulations, way back in the distant past, prior to 1993, it was a voluntary regulation in the UK, just a manufacturer's registration scheme. So manufacturers would register with what was then a Medical Devices Agency, and then there'd be some audits, and it was all kind of nice and fluffy and all kind of nice and easy to do. Then the Medical Device Directive came in, and the In Vitro Diagnostic Medical Device Directive came in from 1993, and there were much stricter requirements on medical devices. They were transposed into UK law as the Medical Devices Regulations 2002 as amended. They've been amended many times since 2002, and basically you can manufacturer would place a CE mark on the product. And it's up to the manufacturer to write the declaration of conformity and make sure they comply with all of the regulations. For some high-risk products, then a notified body would be involved, and the notified body would have a look at the manufacturer's documentation, do some audits, look at their quality management system. Then there was some concerns around products like the breast implants and hip implants, where manufacturers may not have been doing everything they were supposed to be doing, and the system didn't pick it up. So the European Commission decided they wanted to change the regulatory framework. So they changed in 2017 to the EU MDR and the EU IVDR. They have a transition through till 2021 for MDR and 2022 for IVDR. That strengthens the role of notified bodies. That also strengthens the oversight of notified bodies. Much more clinical evidence required, particularly for the in vitro diagnostic medical devices, for the diagnostic test kits, and a much stronger role for post-market surveillance. So a lot more requirements for medical devices, and a significantly greater role on in vitro diagnostics. Then, of course, in 2017, the UK voted in the referendum for Brexit, which happened last year, and we had the end of transition at the beginning of this year. So the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency in the UK, has decided that they will continue to adopt the directives for now, with a transition until 2023 using the UK CA mark. Going through Parliament at the moment is the Medicines and Medical Devices Bill, and we'd expect that to be the Medicines and Medical Devices Act. And the MHRA are currently consulting on what they would like to see in the new regulatory framework. So the medical devices regulations will change from being based on the Medical Devices Directive into something new that the MHRA is looking at. And you'll see in my last slide what is being looked for in the new regulations. The new regulations need to have more trust in the regulatory process. We've heard from the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review. Baroness Cumberledge said much more stronger role for patient safety and for patient involvement in the regulations. reducing the procurement gap, the gap between regulation, the authorization, and procurement, where perhaps people buying products want a bit more clinical evidence and a bit more reassurance about what the product does than manufacturers were able to give on their authorization. A whole lot of new technologies, particularly around genomics, particularly around digital and data, which are challenging the regulatory system. Innovation is absolutely critical, and the research and development is something which we need to be able to bring into the regulatory framework, and then that global alignment, and that is usually through what's called the IMDRF, the International Medical Devices Regulators Forum. Just a little quote there from the European Commission to show kind of why they're looking at changing the regulations and what they're hoping to achieve. And then that quote there down in the bottom right is from the Medicines and Medical Devices Bill, where clearly they are looking for safeguarding public health, looking at the safety of medical devices, but also unusually they're looking at the availability of medical devices being something which will set the framework for the new regulations. And I've never seen this in legislation before, but talking about having the UK as a favourable place in which to do business, in which to have research and development, and to have a medical devices industry manufacturing and supplying medical devices in the UK. That's all I was going to say for now. I guess I'll pass over to Jess.
Great, thank you, Steve. So yes, I am Jessica Shull. I serve as the European lead for the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. And as Alison mentioned, I do also manage digital projects at Bellvitge Hospital in Barcelona. It's a Catalan word, don't worry. Yeah, there's a great need for additional resources in healthcare systems, and COVID really brought this to light. And at the hospital, there aren't enough doctors to go around. There aren't enough resources. We need to harness every tool possible. And digital tools are one of them. And I'll explain how digital therapeutics falls into that. But yeah, I think Steve mentioned this, that yeah, we need to broaden resources. So just a little bit about my background. I've worked in digital health for 20 years. I started out doing virtual medical surgical devices in Washington, D.C. I worked for WHO when e-health was a thing, which then became m-health. And now with digital therapeutics, what you have is that rather than a device itself that has to intervene and touch a patient to create an intervention, it's the actual software which provides the intervention. And so what we do at the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, we intend to broaden the understanding of what these products do and how they do it, the adoption of these products in countries around the world. We work in more than 35 countries now, and an integration into physician workflows and so forth, and helping physicians understand that these are clinically evaluated products, so they can have some trust in the intervention that's actually being given to their patients. I will mention the definition of a digital therapeutic. I'm not really going through my slides in order, but so these are products. Digital therapeutics are products which deliver to patients evidence-based therapeutic interventions driven by high-quality software to prevent, manage, or treat a medical disorder or disease. They can be used independently or in concert with other medications, devices, or other therapies to optimize patient care and health outcomes. So we distinguish between these kinds of products and digital products that monitor patients or diagnose. Those are completely valid and useful and needed, but we don't consider those to be actual digital therapeutics because they're not moving a clinical endpoint of a patient. So that's the distinction. Just to understand what we're talking about as we move forward, because as Steve mentioned, MDR is this medical device regulation that moving forward it is the framework around which medical devices are regulated in Europe, and digital therapeutics are medical devices. So they will fall under that regulation. They currently fall under the MDD, the Medical Device Directive. But there's a very rigorous way to become recognized and receive the CE mark, and the clinical evidence required is not simple. And so this is all to be understood as a medical device. It's complex. It's not your typical app created in someone's basement over 2 weeks. It's years of research. Chief medical officers are involved. Clinical trials. We expect that the results of outcomes for patients, like these results, should be published in peer-reviewed journals, that kind of thing. So you can see more on our website, but that's essentially what DTX is. And yeah, I guess that's all I need to say right now. But just a thought I had is that regulation can seem very dry. It's a lot of legal terminology, but I think what we have before us now is an opportunity to do this well. And it's actually a very exciting time, because I never read medical device regulation until a few years ago, and looking into what can actually be done and the people involved, like they want to have this work. It's all for getting treatments and drugs, everything to the patient. And so we can do this in a way that's safe and effective. And in the UK, there's even more opportunity to do it in a way that is efficient for the best kinds of technologies. Thanks. I'll pass the microphone then to Georgia.
Thank you so much, Jess, and good afternoon, everybody. It's my honor and privilege to be on this esteemed panel. I'm Georgia Ravitz, speaking to you from Washington, D.C. I am a member at the law firm of Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati. We are an international law firm, and I'm based in their Washington, D.C. office. I'm a member in the FDA Healthcare and Consumer Products Group, where we focus on counseling companies before such agencies like the United States Food and Drug Administration, CMS, the FTC, and the CPSC. So we really assist clients from bench to bedside with respect to product development and post-marketing compliance. And here in the US, we are literally on the cusp of change. We have just inaugurated our new president, President Joseph Biden. And whenever there's a change in administration, that means there's going to be, or there already has been, changes made at the executive agencies. And of course, the agency that we are most concerned with today is the United States Food and Drug Administration. As of this very moment, no specific nominee has been mentioned for that role, although there have been a couple of different candidates, and I'll go through some of the changes that are being discussed. But the reason why that's really significant to know is because while the staff positions at the FDA will not change, and obviously the underlying statutory framework does not change, what does change is the messaging from the top, from the political appointees, and that drives a lot of new policy or changes in direction. So there are 3 possible candidates that have been mentioned thus far as people that could be leading the FDA. And 2 of them worked in previous administrations. One is Dr. David Kessler, who currently serves as the Chief Science Officer for President Biden's COVID-19 Response Task Force. He is a former FDA commissioner, having served under both President Bush and President Clinton. And for those of you who may remember, Dr. Kessler is a very well-respected physician and lawyer, and very enforcement-minded. He really is responsible for getting FDA to look and ultimately regulate tobacco, to introduce really radical concepts that now are very commonplace, but it was through Dr. Kessler's efforts that all food and then drugs, over-the-counter drug products, had to have nutrition facts labeling on them. As I said, he was very, very enforcement-minded, which we'll talk about in a moment, what that really could mean for companies looking to import products into the United States. We have another former deputy commissioner who served under President Obama, Dr. Josh Sharfstein. He is another name that's being floated around. He is also enforcement minded, and he has a particular expertise with medical devices. And I think the feeling is that if Dr. Sharfstein is at the helm of the FDA, we can expect a lot more scrutiny of medical devices, including the 510K process. Finally, another name that has come up is Dr. Amy Abernathy, who is the current Deputy FDA Commissioner under Dr. Stephen Hahn. So it's, you know, if I had to guess who is going to be the next commissioner, I would say it's more likely it's going to be one of the first two rather than the last, only because of the, you know, the change in administrations from Republican to Democrat. So what does that mean in terms of, you know, how will that manifest itself in terms of likely effect on FDA regulation? Well, probably one of the most significant changes is that you're going to see a repeal of the regulatory reforms that were instituted under President Trump. And for those of you who remember the beginning of the Trump administration, there was a major push to really reform all of the regulatory agencies, and that meant repealing many old regulations or regulations that really didn't seem very useful anymore. And agencies, excuse me, agencies were very limited in terms of new regulations they could promulgate. For every new regulation they were able to promulgate, they had to sunset 2 regulations. They called it the 2-for-1 rule. So I think that's going to stop, and you're going to see a reintroduction of a lot of regulations. That could be a little, a little bit burdensome on industry. You're going to see a lot more enforcement and a lot more inspections, both domestic and foreign. There was really a bit of a lull in enforcement. So that is going to be a big change. You're going to see more regulation. You're going to see more efforts to regulate areas that might be a little bit in the gray zone, like LDTs, laboratory developed tests, digital health, AI and machine learning. Right now in those areas, sometimes there's, you know, it's difficult to say, does this require some sort of medical device clearance? Does it not? I think that's going to be clarified in the not too distant future. And given the fact that the potential nominees that I mentioned are much more regulatory focused, I think it would be safe to expect that these areas will be more strictly regulated than more loosely regulated. So what are FDA priorities likely to be under this new administration? I think it's fair to say all of our efforts in the COVID and pandemic related drug and device space will definitely continue. You're going to see more EUAs, emergency use authorizations, offered and authorized by FDA. And of course, don't forget that EUAs, unlike regular FDA approvals or clearances, they will sunset when the pandemic is declared over. So they will no longer be allowed to be on the market here in the United States. You're going to see increased enforcement for all COVID and non-COVID regulated products. Even for EUA products, by the way. There's been some to date, but you're going to see more of that. You will see greater efforts to keep drug prices down, more efforts to promote generic and biosimilar competition, continued use of our Defense Production Act and Procurement Act to make sure that we have enough materials to produce whatever we need in this fight against COVID. You will see continued progress for decentralized clinical trial acceptance. In the COVID space in particular, you're going to see a continued push to make tests available to the public, molecular tests, antigen tests, and serology tests. And when I say to the public, I mean direct to consumer, over the counter, at home use. You will also likely see more activity at our ports in terms of import alerts, product detentions, import bans. So while this has been down the last 4 years, it would be safe to assume that there's going to be greater scrutiny at the ports. You know, everybody always asks about AI and machine learning, and you know, FDA has been a little slow to actually issue specific guidance with respect to AI. Although earlier this week, FDA did issue an action plan for AI, which is kind of exciting, although it wasn't very specific in the sense that there's no guidance documents that came from it, although the agency did state that they will be releasing some draft guidance later this year. Draft guidance is not the same as a regulation, nor is actually finalized guidance, but it does dictate where the agency, you know, how they will apply certain policies and procedures. And sometimes FDA, it's much easier for the agency to issue guidance documents than to go through rulemaking, because they have to go through a notice and comment period. So I think that with respect to some of these more, you know, innovative products, you'll see more guidance documents being released rather than actual rulemaking. In terms of the AI, FDA stated in its action plan that it is going to try to develop harmonized good machine learning practices. So that's good news. So I would expect that the FDA will be working with other regulators around the world. And there will be increased use of real-world performance data, including real-world evidence generation, particularly in the areas of software as a medical device. But those, I think, would be, you're going to definitely see changes in these areas pretty quickly. And I think that will have a big effect on on product development and of course, you know, post-marketing compliance. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you all very much for that introduction. I'm now going to ask the panel a few questions, many of them COVID related. It's the topic of the moment, and probably the moment for regulation of life sciences, and all of us who spend all of our time talking about things that people have probably never heard of before, but you know, now everyone is able to talk about PPE, whereas previously they'd never heard of it. So now is the moment, and that's very much going to be the focus of this panel. So I'm going to ask the first question to Steve. Which regulators might be most willing to change their internal processes after COVID? So obviously thinking to UK and Europe, and then I'll go to Georgia and see if she thinks the FDA are going to change their processes as a result of having to deal with the pandemic.
Thank you, Alison. I don't think there's any appetite to change the medicines regulation in Europe at the moment, and I think there's still the standstill for medicines regulation in the UK. For EU medical device regulation, obviously for medical devices and IVDs, those regulations have been written and they're now kind of, you know, set. and halfway, almost through their transition. But for the UK, the regulatory process is just going to change completely. And I think it gives the UK a chance to look at what's happened in COVID, all the derogations, all the near patient testing, all the self-testing, and things like the use of target product profiles. And then, of course, looking at digital health regulation and thinking, well, how can they be put into the new UK legislation? And I think it gives the UK some flexibility. I'm not here to kind of say, for or against Brexit. Brexit has happened. This is what we're dealing with. So the opportunity is to look at the regulation and see how it can change to best suit the UK. And in fact, the Medicines and Medical Devices Bill saying it's got to be legislation which makes the UK a favourable place to do business.
Now over to Georgia. What are your thoughts on the FDA approach to change?
That's a great question. I don't think that the FDA will change its processes for, bringing products to market to treat COVID or for future pandemics. I do think there will be changes at related agencies and certainly at the cabinet level, because I think we learned that it's pretty critical to have a robust pandemic planning office and individuals who do nothing but devote their time to ensuring that when we have a public health emergency, pandemic like this, or like one we may be dealing with in the future, we can react much more quickly. But the processes that FDA has in place are actually pretty good. And I don't think they haven't really come under criticism for, being too slow to, authorize things under an EUA. And I know that we've worked with quite a number of companies and individuals who sought authorization for different kinds of devices, PPE, some drugs, some test kits, and FDA, to the agency's credit, moved very swiftly and very collaboratively. So, they definitely did their job, and I don't think that they don't have a gap with respect to doing what's necessary during times like this. But I think changes will be made at the Department of Health and Human Services at a higher level, and probably the Center for Disease Control, NIH. So the sister agencies, I'm sure, will undergo some changes, but that'll be more policy focused.
Right. That actually moves nicely on to the next question, which is about regulatory agencies, and I might go a bit wider into the sort of healthcare piece. So we've got the vaccines on operating. They've actually been putting them into quite a lot of people now. Diagnostic tests have been put on the market. We've got ventilators in the UK that were produced incredibly quickly and authorised very, very quickly. But actually the wider healthcare market has changed in terms of people were used to, certainly in the UK, going to see their doctor and having face-to-face consultations, and it's now reached a point where that has completely turned around, and most consultations now are not in person. They may be by video or generally by telephone, and different ways of actually providing healthcare. Some of which is can be done through devices, and digital devices in particular for patient monitoring. And Jessica talked earlier about quite how difficult it has been in terms of having enough manpower to get round all the patients in the hospital, and actually digital offers a way of reducing the amount of human time required, but yet being able to still monitor patients possibly better than a human being can do. Human beings get tired, which technology doesn't. It works or it doesn't work, but it doesn't get tired. So I wonder, Jessica, if you want to talk about the role for regulatory agencies, in that wider context.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a broad question, and a very good question, because I think it's one that we are currently having to address. And so digital health, writ large, can include all kinds of things. So as you mentioned, individual patient monitoring at home. They wouldn't have to go into the hospital, especially patients who are at risk, who have underlying, if they have diabetes, if they have already COPD or cancer or something, that makes them a little more susceptible to a virus or whatever may be the next problem that we come up against. So there's monitoring. There's also actually, you can treat patients at home. That's what digital therapeutics provide. So you have, so for diseases like COPD and asthma and diabetes, and there are actual treatment protocols that digital therapeutics provide so that patients are less likely to have to go to the hospital or see their doctor. They are in touch with their physician, and these products are prescribed. And so it's not like suddenly you're just speaking to your cell phone. The idea is that there's an additional tool that physicians can use to alleviate a bit of the pressure from the patient having to move, but also they get concise data about what the patient is doing, how they're feeling, whatever they have decided they want to see about their patient. So that's a therapeutic side. And there are, I think, 37 or so different diseases that are currently addressed with digital therapeutics. And then there's also diagnosis. So there's a whole range of sort of digital medicine that can be enacted and brought to the home. But the regulators, they can be brought to regulation in terms of being CE marked as medical devices. You have telemedicine platforms, which are not medical devices, but they have to be approved. They have to be, they have to work well. That's sort of a different category. So once you have digital medicine and digital diagnostics and digital therapeutics, medical devices, okay. But bringing these into the actual healthcare system is the next step. And it is, in a way, regulation, because there are health technology assessment bodies which have to approve of these products and say, yes, it's safe. We do actually think that this could be used in our system. It will actually save patients time and improve their health outcomes, and perhaps even save the system money. But it's really difficult to provide the evidence that they want to see because they don't know what they need to see. And it's not, I think NHS and NICE have done a very good job in building out frameworks for evidence standards. And it's one of a few countries in the world that has, but it still doesn't automatically translate to use in the system. And I think that's that last step that we're still missing. But I think that's where MHRA and NICE can now build in. And I think this is the intention, to make it a little bit more streamlined, a little bit easier to understand what's needed, and not to have to duplicate the evidence that a company has already generated for their CE mark or for their UKCA mark, to be able to use data from possibly even, from France or from another country, because these are, the same kinds of patients with the same disease, instead of having to duplicate it in a certain clinical commissioning group, because that's where you want to deliver the product. So there's a long continuum, I suppose, of communication that needs to happen between all these agencies to understand what's already being done and the evidence being generated, so that we, it's no longer a mystery, to the other side of the equation.
Thank you very much, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, I've got your favorite topic, which is diagnostics. So COVID-19 has necessitated, obviously, the authorization of an enormous number of diagnostics. And again, diagnostics wasn't, the primary focus of the life sciences industry. And I think COVID has at least sort of brought that to the fore as being something that's incredibly important in the patient pathway. In terms of, what do you see as the lingering impacts of on the diagnostics industry of COVID? Do you see changes coming as a result?
Yeah, an incredible number of changes, I think. COVID-19, and it's become a cliche now, but shone a huge spotlight on the regulation of diagnostics. And people now, people are talking about sensitivity and specificity and positive and negative predictive value, and have an understanding of what a diagnostic is like never ever before. And you know, they didn't have to really, but now they do. Now they do need to understand what's being offered, and I think, you know, some of the where the regulation wasn't as strong, we now need to strengthen it. So in terms of kind of what is the intended use of a product, what is the clinical evidence to support it, but also kind of, you know, our politicians are now more aware. And as we say, that having written into legislation, you know, that making the UK a favourable place to do business is something which is incredible. And I'm really, you know, we can see some of the work that's happening to do that, to make sure the regulations are fit for purpose, and to make sure that there is sufficient diagnostic capacity in the UK. There's a lot of talk about the German capacity to make and use diagnostics in the beginning of the pandemic compared to the UK, and now kind of we're on a par with them, and that's fantastic. That's really great to see. I guess in terms of other changes in diagnostics, I think it gives support to patient safety aspects of the new regulations, to make sure that those are baked in, that the patient safety and the public health is baked into the regulations, and not kind of driven by purely commercial thoughts, but also that the research and development is baked in as well, so that actually people can innovate and people can bring products to market very quickly where they need to, where there's a clear unmet clinical need, and you have a promising new technology, but it's not tied up in red tape, that those products can get to the market as quickly as possible. And we really need to kind of put some effort in to make sure we can make that happen.
I wonder if we might move to Brexit. And actually, I'd be interested to see Jessica's view on this as someone who's living in the EU as opposed to the UK. I mean, it's obviously a significant rupture for the UK, and it's going to have to move alone. You know, what do you think are the opportunities for the UK, looking at it from the outside?
Interesting. Yeah, so I should say I live outside Barcelona. So Spain has its own kind of regulatory hiccups, but so I think, you know, for our sector, for the digital health and you know, software as a medical device sector, MDR is in place. It's what we're following. It is very written in stone. You can read it. It's straightforward. So I think as the UK develops, you know, the way that they're going to move forward, there's an opportunity to either align and make things easier. I'm not saying to align with MDR, just because it is a really, it's a document that I love and hate, you know. So it's not not something to be copied, but there are parameters within it which companies, you know, 26 other countries are following. And so the pieces that make sense, that can be aligned, and maybe combined with what comes from the FDA, you know, can be something that makes a wide open market, and maybe not something that we can have immediately, but I want to see that happen, rather than there be this division, like, oh well, you've got a CE mark, but you're completely useless in the UK. You know, that would be a shame. So we'll see. I mean, I think there's a lot of also great innovation happening in the UK, so it would be nice to have it come this way. And so for the same reason, I think that alignment has to happen. And in fact, you know, the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, we are working with different health technology assessment groups to sort of have a conversation about what those requirements are. So hopefully we can help bridge that gap.
And actually that takes me on to Steve. Do you see the UK focusing on international standards or focusing on the EU regulations? Where do you see the direction of travel in terms of the main body of regulation?
Yeah, I think there's a danger of cherry picking the best bits of everybody, but I think maybe MHRA are taking a reasonable approach. they are de facto members of IMDRF, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, because they were the most active of the European group. So whether they now kind of become part of IMDRF as an observer or as a full member, it's irrelevant. Graham Tunbridge, who's the director of devices at MHRA, will be sat at that table, listening to and influencing how the international regulations go. I guess we already adopted international standards, ISOs, so they're already international, and they support the EU regulatory framework, and I'm sure they will continue to support the UK regulatory framework. So there's already kind of an international push there. There's probably some really useful elements of Australian and US regulation that we really need to look at. We really need to think about. But the MHRA has said they will be using the MDR and IVDR as the starting point, the basis for their thinking around the new UK regulations. So it gives an opportunity for things like genomics, things like digital, and some of the kind of really interesting points about that Jessica was making about getting diagnostic tests closer to patients, or making sure patients can get their samples more easily to the laboratory. A lot of really interesting work going on there, which was never really covered by the regulations pre-COVID, which now in a I'm not going to say post-COVID, but as we're living with COVID, we can really kind of get the UK regulations to look at those and support those.
Thank you. Georgia, I appreciate we're in very early days for the new administration. Do you think President Joe Biden's administration will make changes that you would like? And what would you like? If you had a wish list, what would you hand over to him?
I think that what would be very useful, and what many people have learned as a result of COVID, is that there needs to be a greater recognition and acceptance of this notion that healthcare can be sort of practiced more at home. So a greater acceptance of what we call direct-to-consumer healthcare items. And actually, I had neglected to mention that when you had asked me the previous question, and I said to you that FDA really had done a fabulous job with respect to COVID and making sure products were authorized in a prompt manner. The one area where we were a little disappointed, and if that could be changed going forward, would be to allow consumers to get a hold of tests, test kits, and other kinds of important, diagnostics that they can be used at home and then sent out, to a lab, rather than having, patients, consumers go to a healthcare facility, particularly when it's not entirely necessary. And I think that there was a really big learning curve there, because as we were, grappling with COVID and not knowing where it was safe to go and when it was safe to go, or whether we could go at all, we really needed to make products more readily available to people at home. And so I would say that's probably the top of my wish list. And that really, dovetails with the question that you had posed to Jess, which is, changes with respect to telemedicine, telehealth, digital health, and quite a number of products in those spaces have applicability in context and settings other than just a traditional healthcare setting. And I think we can really do a lot if we can get the FDA to whether it's, issue some guidances or perhaps develop a new regulatory framework for, devices that are more direct to consumer. But they're more than just wellness devices, because here in the United States, we do have this distinction where wellness devices don't necessarily need FDA pre-market clearance. So they'd be more than wellness devices. They'd be actual, diagnostics. And I think we could probably do more work in that space, get things like that out faster to the public so they can reduce the load on all aspects of our healthcare system, whether it's the laboratories, the physician offices, the hospitals.
So it sounds, Georgia, as though you feel that the regulators need to be mindful of the way in which people consume healthcare products in order to,
exactly
live their lives the way we want to live them.
That's exactly right.
Jessica, would you like to sort of talk on that topic?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think it's happening whether the regulators are active in this area or not. And so I think they're aware of this, and it is happening. And there are many, many products already on the market. So it's not something that they have to, sort of puzzle over. There's a way forward. And especially, as generations come to, to be middle-aged and so forth, I mean, who had never known life without a mobile phone. We're talking about, they're going to have their entire medical experience virtually, unless they require surgery. But even then, it can be virtual. So yeah, there's I think it's a wave change happening that is pretty much unstoppable.
And Steve, do you feel that regulators are sufficiently mindful of the way in which products are consumed?
I don't think they were. And I think there's a feeling that it'd be either a healthcare professional or a device which was used at home. But I think now it's very, very clear that people are accessing healthcare and accessing products, accessing information about themselves in different ways. We should be mindful of the risks of that. That telling everybody you've got COVID antibodies or you're negative for COVID, that's not without risk. There is a risk attached to that, and I think looking at things like usability, human factors, looking at behavioural changes and decision making, it's really important to have a look at that and see what. We've talked about the benefits. We also need to balance that against the potential risks and make sure the public are protected from those risks whilst still being able to access that really important healthcare.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point. Well, it just remains for me to say thank you very much to all three of our panelists. I think you've given us a fascinating insight to the way in which regulation is changing, is going to continue to change, I think, for the rest of our careers, and keeps everything very interesting for all of us. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Alison.
Pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.